It's been 20 years since a new mainstream book has come out about Somali cuisine. Today, we're talking to the author who wrote the book. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for writers, readers, and cooks. I'm Kate Leahy, and today I'm joined with Kristin Donnelly. Hey, Kristin.
Hey, Kate.
When we were planning this episode, we were talking about how oftentimes we get a lot of DMs or emails through the podcast, through our websites, about how to get a cookbook published. Someone has a lot of recipes, they have a great idea, and they want to know what the next step is. What's usually the answer?
Listen to Everything Cookbooks, right?
Right?
No, but sometimes I do try and suss out, like, what have you done so far besides just reach out to me? Have you shown your expertise in any other way, or you're just banking on the book? Like the book is where you want to put it all and you haven't become known in some way as an authority.
Right, because usually the answer is not to start with a cookbook. Usually
Correct.
It's to start by building a community around the subject matter.
Yes.
Today's interview really goes into how an author can make this work over many years. You know, the cookbook doesn't have to be the first goal. It can be the destination. Ifrah Ahmed was born in Somalia and came to the U.S. in 1996 as a refugee. Her family settled in Seattle and she learned how to cook with her mom. Now she has this book that is this accumulation of expertise in a culture and a cuisine.
You know, it's just another story of the 10-year overnight success. I mean, yeah, right. There is no overnight success here, but just talking with Ifrah, you'll get to hear the slow build. She uses the word intentional, and it wasn't necessarily always intentional to write a cookbook, but it was intentional with the mission of learning about and preserving Somali cuisine. So everything was oriented toward that. And then this book did eventually come, and it is a stunner.
Really is. There's so much in this book that I would not expect from a debut author. But in our conversation with Ifrah, she talks about how she had such a clear vision for this book from the start. She even knew the two photographers she'd want to work with, one who would shoot in Somalia with her and the other one who would shoot in New York City in studio. To have that sophistication of vision for a first-time author is pretty rare.
Yeah, it is rare, but I actually think it's something for most of us to work toward, right?
Yes. Yeah.
If the book is, I think Molly's called it vague shower thoughts. If a book is a vague shower thought at this point, you're not ready.
You're not ready, right? Yeah. Because it is such a long process and it really does pay off to have a really clear vision.
Yeah.
So let's bring her on. Ifrah, welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Thank you so much for having me.
And congratulations on your beautiful new cookbook. We can't wait to delve into it in this conversation.
Thank you.
Before we get into your book, we thought we would just rewind a little bit and get to know your backstory. What was it that drew you to preserving Somali food traditions specifically?
Well, I would say that I have always sort of been interested in the way that Somali culture develops overall. So before I even was writing about food or Somali culinary traditions, I actually used to run a magazine with my cousin called Aduela Abroad, and it was a Somali arts and culture magazine for Somali women, where we would highlight, just the contributions of Somali women in the arts and creative spaces globally. And so a lot of that documentation for me started back then formally, but probably even earlier, just through being online and connecting with other Somali people. The food was sort of a natural extension of that, that kind of cultural preservation work that I was already doing, sort of was witness to as well, just growing up, seeing the development of the cuisine. And
how old were you when you were doing that magazine?
How old was I? I'm doing mental math. Well, we started the magazine in 2014. So
okay.
However old I was.
However old,
yeah,
right.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering the era.
Was that when you were in law school?
Yeah, so I started law school in 2014. So it was right around the same period where I moved to New York, started this magazine, started law school. There's a lot going on.
No kidding.
But then you moved into doing a pop-up.
Yeah, I started Milk and Myrrh after I had this really life-changing kind of trip back to Somalia, homecoming sort of like trip where I went with my mother in 2018, and it was the first time that I had gone back since I was a child. And so Milk and Myrrh started around that time. The idea for the cookbook and the pop-up, they sort of happened simultaneously, but I knew that I wanted to do the cookbook like really early on, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting in your intro you write, without fully realizing it, I had also been writing a book.
Yeah.
So you're in law school and you decide like maybe law school isn't the right place for you. What was that like?
Well, I actually had already transitioned out of like the legal field by the time that the pop-up started. Basically, I'd been thinking about transitioning into culinary for a while, but it was something that I was really nervous to do, going into a creative career blindly,
Right. Yeah.
especially when there's like no real road for you to follow, and no real representation of Somali chefs or cookbook authors or recipe developers.
Yeah.
And so, I was nervous about this path that I was essentially making up as I went along. It was really that trip back home that was like, okay, this is something that feels like it's kind of like my calling and something that I really need to like pursue. And so there was like this period where I was still doing kind of like legal jobs and like legal work, but also was really immersing myself into like the food world and like learning about what was what and what was happening and what was exciting. So it was this kind of like educational period in which I was also using the fact that I was like educating myself about the industry as a way to procrastinate on actually doing the thing that I wanted to do, which is, like launch the pop-up. And I love being in research mode because I feel like you can just be there forever.
Right. It's a safe place. It's fun. You're learning. You feel like you're making
Absolutely.
progress, which you are, but it's not the same as doing. What was the reaction to the pop-ups? You did them in all over the country.
Initially I was like, yeah, I hope people have some interest in this. Like, I think it's interesting. I think it's cool. That's why I'm doing it. But the feedback was pretty instant in terms of like people's enthusiasm, and every single pop-up would pretty much sell out within 24 hours, and so I just was like, what's happening? Clearly there's like a level of like appreciation and like enthusiasm that I'm still super grateful for. I actually just did my first pop-up in 3 years that sold out also in under almost 24 hours.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Wow.
So it's been consistent. It's been great even after like a long hiatus. I feel really blessed and to like have that support. But yeah, people's reactions were just very excited, very interested, very supportive, pretty instantly, I would say.
And are most people who go from Somalia, or?
I would say it's a mix. Yeah, it's a really good mix. It's really diverse. There's definitely a really strong Somali scene because I think it's the first time that people are having that kind of representation in the culinary space and are able to experience like a Somali pop-up, different from like a brick and mortar. But I would say also it's just a huge mix, really reflective of the cities that I do it in, so primarily like LA and like New York. And it's really people from all walks of life, but a lot of people from the communities that I belong to.
Very cool. When did you decide to formally go through that process of trying to write the book and get it sold?
I would say like 2023 was around the time where I had been publishing recipes for a couple of years. So basically I started with the pop-ups and then the pandemic hit. And then at the same time, I was pregnant with my daughter. And so it just was like a transitionary phase. And I was really sick like during my pregnancy. So I had a really like not great relationship with food because I couldn't keep anything down. But
yeah.
So that really also impacted, what was happening with the pop-ups and stuff. So, at that time I got more into like the writing aspect of this sort of like, I guess, like documentation process. And so I started writing about these traditions and also publishing recipes in different sort of like publications. And so I think I did like LA Times, Washington Post, and then eventually got to write for the Times. And I've been a consistent contributor there for a couple of years now. From there, the recipes really started to take shape. And I realized like, oh, okay, this is sort of becoming like a body of work. And also I was interviewing people as well, you know, so some of the people that are interviewed in this cookbook, like the couple that runs Hawash, which is like a pioneering Somali food blog from like the 2010s. So I was like, okay, like there's the basis of the book here. Because also when I thought about the book initially, I was like, you know, this documentation needs to happen, but I wasn't sure whether it was going to be a cookbook or whether it would be actually like an academic book about the culinary history of like Somalia. I really love like the historical, political components of things. Like I have a political science degree as well. And so that's also like another love. And but once I saw the feedback that people were having to it, I was like, okay, like people are very grateful that these recipes are here. Like I'm getting folks writing me, some non-Somali folks for sure who are like curious about the cuisine, but like a lot of Somali people being like, wow, like it's so convenient to actually have this like written down because also, you know, it's an oral tradition. And so I was like, okay, like, yeah, the academic portion, the historical component is incredibly important, but people actually need to see how to literally do the recipes. They need the literal steps, you know, and so maybe there's a way that I can sort of marry all of these things where it's not just a cookbook, but it has the recipes, it has like the historical component, because you need that to also understand like why the food is the way that it is. Right. And then also to include this component of the interviews that I had already begun doing, highlighting like some of our pioneers like Hawash.
Mm-hmm. When did you start working with your agent and how did she help guide the process?
There was a period of time where I was like, okay, I should probably have an agent. At that time, I had also had a lot of agents following me and they'd been following me for a while. But for me, I was like really intentional about this cookbook process because even though I had the idea for the book like a decade ago, I knew that I needed to build up my skill set to get to the point where I could write a book like this. I knew that I had the knowledge and everything, but I really wanted the experience. And so I was very intentional about having like the chefing experience, but also the recipe development experience, having the experience of like writing the articles, etc., so that all of that could build up to me being able to like write this book. So I was like, okay, I need an agent once I had kind of started publishing recipes, and especially once I was like contributing to the Times like pretty consistently. And I had like several agents that I was like talking to. My agent Claire is incredible. So she reached out to me early summer 2023. She sort of like reintroduced herself because I guess she had been following my work since I was on Tumblr, like a decade prior.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Because I used to like publish recipes on Tumblr. Like for example, my very first recipe on Tumblr was for malawah, which is like our like cardamom sort of like crepe. I think that was the very first or second New York Times recipe that I did.
Wow.
Nice.
So Claire had read a piece that I did for Eater about like Somali cuisine and forced migration and the impact of like migration on the cuisine, and was basically like, hey, like I've been following your work since Tumblr and I was really excited to see some of the more recent work that you were doing. And so basically we got into conversation and I was like really charmed by the fact that, you know, she had been familiar with my work going back to Tumblr. And so I was like, wow, this is like really cool actually, you know, and we got reacquainted and then started like the process of like, okay, what do you want to do? Like, what's your goal? You know, what's your dream? What can I help you with? And I had a very clear vision from day one and I let her know, and we got to work on crafting kind of like the proposal together. And yeah, she was immensely helpful in bringing that to life. We just started the process like several months later of trying to sell the book.
Was it a pretty lengthy proposal?
I don't know, because like I feel like I talked to some agents and they were like, well, it needs to be like 100 pages. What? And then I would talk to other people and they would say, oh, it only needs to be like 50 or something. So I would say like 60 pages or something. So somewhere in the middle.
That's pretty substantial. I mean, I feel like for a book like yours, it's for people who haven't seen the book, it's just this beautiful combination of history and interviews, like you said, but then even from a photography point of view, like a lot of food photography mixed with location photography. So I feel like just to set the scene, having that more in-depth proposal was helpful.
For sure. I mean, I definitely had to have the pictures, and I had already selected the two photographers that I knew that I wanted to work with. So I put in samples of their work that felt like similar to what I would think would be interesting or like aesthetically like my style. Yeah, I definitely had to explain like the different like components, but I didn't know how they would work together. I didn't know if they would be standalone sections, or interwoven. And actually, like weaving it all together was the idea of my editor at Hardy Grant, Jenny Wapner. So she had the beautiful idea of like making it all cohesive instead of these like standalone sort of like portions. But yeah, I had to really explain what the vision was and really hope that someone got
Right.
it.
Yeah, I want to like back up here because I think there's a lot of people who listen to the podcast who want to write a book someday, their dream. And sometimes they think I need to do the book first. But the way that you've done it, where you didn't do the book first, you started building this career. You cooked for people in public places. It wasn't just like you in your home kitchen. You did freelance articles. You reached out. You interviewed people. You were like, gaining all these skills and learning about how the business worked. And then people were coming to you because they wanted your book. And so you did it like you kind of like gave yourself a master's in how to write a cookbook, but also just like how to be a food professional. So I think like people listening to this can like take this conversation, take what you're saying and say, this isn't an overnight success. You didn't wake up and say, I'm going to write a cookbook. And then 2 years later, here's your book.
Right. First of all, that's just like my personality to really be thorough and to really plan and be intentional about what I'm doing. So I'm like that with everything, actually. So that's a part of my personality, for better or for worse. But writing a book like this, I had to do it with great care and with great intention, and also like switching into an industry. I don't want to show up and immediately feel like I'm saying that I'm the expert in something. Like I'm really into learning, and I've been like that since I was really little. I wanted basically to be equipped with as much of the skills as possible to execute this book in the way that I wanted it to be done, and with the care and with the intention that I felt was like necessary for a subject matter like this.
Yeah. It's interesting too that you started with the magazine about arts and culture. And I heard an interview with you on the Taste podcast. You basically had this network of friends who are experts around the globe in Somali culture, history, who you could either lean on as sources or people to review parts of the text for you. But at the same time, that really builds your network. So then when the book comes out, you have all these people who are like really excited to support you, which I think is also another incredible lesson for any author. Intentional is such a good word.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because a lot of those friendships now are 10, 15, 20 years old. Those are relationships that I made in my early teen years. Someone here knows someone there, and then suddenly like 10 people in a city, 20 people in a city, 30 people in a city. And while that was like very intentionally happening for like the Somali arts and culture space for a long time for me, starting from the magazine, and also like all the work that I've ever done is always connected. So whether it's doing legal work for the Somali community, or whether it's doing translation work, or doing pop-ups, or these like online kind of like cultural relationships, like the food, there's like a line through everything, right? And so there is that connection with the Somali community. But then I think also moving to New York for law school initially, but then also being here, over a decade, I also, once I entered the industry, started to meet people that were also starting out, and like that were Somali or like non-Somali people as well, and so meeting a lot of other folks of color, a lot of other women, a lot of other Muslims like in the food space, a decade later. A lot of my friends now have cookbooks out or are starting restaurants, or a lot of my like industry friendships as well, whether it's with chefs or recipe developers or journalists, because I feel like I kind of have a hand in all of these pots as well. Usually I feel like when you are starting off, there is a pressure to say, okay, I'm going to be a cookbook author or a recipe developer or a stylist or, whatever it is. And I think because I was so open to just learning about the industry in general, I was able to really create that network of people like across different paths within the culinary and like food media industry.
Yeah, it's more fun that way too, not just doing the same thing over and over.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you have this proposal. It's very thorough. And from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you had a very clear map in your head of how you could see this book come to life. So maybe certain things were moved around later on in the editing process, but the proposal is pretty much like what you had in there, and your table of contents kind of stayed to what's in the book currently. Is that right?
I don't remember what the table contents were. I think it shifted so that it felt more natural to people's like kind of eating patterns. And that also, I think, was at the suggestion of Jenny, where it maybe isn't these like formal, these are the breakfast dishes, these are, and it was more just like what would be happening in the morning, what's happening in mid-afternoon. I'm glad that she gave me the space to do that, because that is more in line with Somali culture anyways. What has shifted is really only things that made the book better. The good chunk of Somalia is really exactly what I proposed.
That shows that it was a good editor-author relationship.
Totally.
This book, I believe, went to auction.
It did, yeah.
What was that like? And how did you land on the decision to work with Hardy Grant and Jenny Wapner?
The auction, I was like, wow, I was not expecting this. Like, this is amazing. And I think I also wasn't expecting it, because I had some agents that I spoke to where there's this thing that happens, and I think this will probably be interesting for folks that want to write. There's such a big push for social media numbers, right? Like for you to have like a certain amount. And so I realized that this thing had been happening where there was an expectation, the same expectation for someone that's a food influencer versus like someone that's a chef versus someone that's like a recipe developer, for all of us to kind of be like content creators and to like have these mass like social media like numbers. And to me, like I found that to be very frustrating, because I'd really intentionally stayed out of that influencing space, because I didn't want to be trying to like sell people things or like influence people to like buy things, like products outside of like the actual work that I was producing. So I found that to be like very frustrating, where I would talk to agents and they would be super interested, but there was always the concern of like, okay, well, how can we grow like the social media numbers, And for me, I would kind of feel like they were missing the point, because I felt like even though maybe my numbers weren't someone who has like 30, 40, 100,000 followers, the community that I do have has been built over many, many years. And the people that do follow my work or do follow me really deeply care, always there to support whatever it is that I'm dropping, whether that's like a pop-up or a recipe or an article. I kind of felt like they were prioritizing quantity like over quality. And I also found it interesting that like there was the same expectation of social media numbers and content creation from all of us in the industry, whether you're a journalist or, a chef or the literal food influencer. That standard was like becoming the expectation. And I felt like a lot was like being lost there. And so when I would talk to agents, if that was a thing that they were like really focusing on, I immediately was not interested in working with them.
Good for you.
No matter where they were at, or what, if they were like a high powered agent, however many books they sold. I did find the feedback helpful, only in the sense that like it kept reaffirming what I was already feeling. Yeah, I'm aware that this is like a standard that's like happening in the industry and is now being applied to everyone, regardless of what part of the food industry that they're in. But I know my audience, and like someone just coming in and seeing like, okay, you have X amount of followers, they're not really ever going to fully grasp what I know about the people that support my work. They care, like they really like deeply care. I really wanted to go with someone that understood the work. And then also the same with publishers. We had several different conversations with people, and I had really great meetings. And ultimately, I really wanted to go with a publisher that understood what this book was, really understood that it was special and that it was unique, and that this was sort of like a once in a lifetime kind of book, and that it was really needed, and that it needed to have all the different components of it, and that it wasn't just a cookbook, that it wouldn't just be recipes, that it would have to equally be everything else, and that is really like what made the book special. That's what ended up happening for me. Price is always something, right? In terms of like advance, like that's always incredibly helpful. If I can get a great advance, like that will be wonderful. But ultimately, the most important thing to me is to be with a publisher that understands my book and understands my intentionality and like vision for it and will respect that and will kind of shepherd that along.
Yeah.
And so Hardy Grant, we know Jenny and her work. It sounds like they were just the right partner fit for that.
Absolutely.
They were. And Jenny sent me this like really nice, like handwritten note as well, you know, and I remember really being like, oh, like there's like a really deep level of care here and like intentionality. And we just clicked, you know, and I just really felt like she gets it. My advice for people would be like, obviously, money is important. I'm very happy with my advance, you know, but there were also definitely higher offers that came in that I didn't go with because I believed in Jenny and Hardy Grant so much.
Wow, cool. When you were defining the audience for the book, because I think in the Taste podcast, you talk about how the primary audience for this is Somalis, like people who maybe have been detached from their culture. Did you expand, or was there pressure to expand the audience from that?
No, there's no pressure. Jenny is incredible. Hardy Grant's incredible. They just get it. Like, you know, there was no pressure to change whatever my vision was. I think there just was total trust from them in what my vision was. And for me, like, my work has always centered Somali people. The book is open to other people for sure.
Yeah.
Like if they want to learn, you know, especially with the pop-ups with like the recipes for the times, I've always tried to educate people and like welcome people into the fold of like Somali culture and have really been open to that. But ultimately, like my center is Somali people, and that's what the book is for. And my center has always been Somali people, even going back to the magazine, you know. And so if I'm educating people and people are learning something, that's great. But I didn't want to be in a space where I'm explaining Somali culture to non-Somali people, and then that's like primarily my focus. Like I wanted this to be useful to Somali people first and foremost.
Yeah, it's important to have an audience in mind, I think, when you're writing a book. And this is not like the tour guide's version of Somali food. This is your perspective. We got the book in the mail, and immediately you're drawn in with the bright colors, the photography, the coastline. Like, it was just so fantastic that there's a combination, like you said, of those two different photographers, location photography and food photography. But then also, like, the stories are so rich. So we want to get into how you wrote the history. How far back did you think you needed to go historically? Because it's a big like chunk in the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, let's just go back to the absolute beginning because I feel like there's so much development of Somalia, Somali culture, Somali identity, and there is just like a fundamental misunderstanding of even what any of that is. People, if they have any idea, you know, sometimes it's like a very negative sort of idea of Somali identity. And then most of the time, actually, they just have no idea, right? And so for me, like, I really wanted to go back very, very, very far to like the 7th century. I don't know, like, I don't know when I started, but
yeah, it's like, you know, Egypt gets all the attention for being an ancient place, but Somali's right there and it's just as ancient.
Somali's very ancient. We're definitely very ancient people. And it was kind of fun talking about that relationship between Somalia and like ancient Egypt and the land of Punt and like all of that. Because I think people also don't have a concept of that either. I think I go as far back as the beginning of the herding lifestyles versus people that were more sedentary, like even before the introduction of Islam, which obviously had like a significant impact on the development of the cuisine and trade and the culture. There's actually a lot of the historical section that got cut.
Really?
Yeah, that was the hardest part for me. The recipes, I did a lot of recipes in a month, almost to a point where I would tell other recipe developers and they would be like, are you insane? Like, you know, so like that was a really concentrated period of time. But the historical section took about 2 or 3 months to write. A lot of material got cut because I think at one point Jenny was like, Ifrah, got the historical section. It's incredible, very academic, meticulously researched, but we're going to have to cut some of it because this is still a cookbook at the end of the day. And if we leave what you have in there, you know, as wonderful as it is, we're not going to have any space for like anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, second book.
Yeah,
Second book.
second book.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but I think it really shows that I didn't know initially. This really could have been a standalone, like, academic book without, like, the recipes and everything. And so, you have to really understand the history, I think, to understand everything else so that you have a context for why we're eating the way that we're eating. And I think just the geographical location and the trading relationships and the politics, it makes sense, I think, once you read the historical section and you sort of get that background and people's stories. Also, I couldn't just tell the stories without also having the context of, like, well, why did this person, like, leave Somalia, right? Like, what was happening and why did they go from this, like, incredible childhood to, having to be forced to, like, migrate abroad. And I think, like, the historical section being first also provides the context for why the food is what it is, and then also the experiences that the people featured in the book are having.
I'm glad that you went really far back because it does give context to a part of the world that I think a lot of Americans never really learned in school.
Right.
And is this pivotal point for trade. It has this huge coastline, which I think if people think Somalia, they're not thinking huge coastline, even though it's really an important part of how the food was developed, right?
Right, absolutely.
You have this, like, pasta dish with, like, a tuna sauce, but it's spiced with the traditional sort of Somali spices. So it's like, oh, because the Italians were also part. I mean, you forget, like, all these different influences that came into Somalia over these many, centuries.
Yeah.
You're right. Like, having the history really does set that, like, platform for what comes next in the book.
Also, like, I think it sets the context for, like, Somalia not just being a place where we are influenced or taken influence, but really being an active part of these, like, trading networks and really being at the forefront of, like, introducing things to other places as well and bringing things back in, like, consciously, especially when it comes to African food in general. Like, there is an idea that we're always being influenced and we're not really, like, influencing. And I think in the historical section, like, I was really trying to show, no, actually, this has been an active trading nation for a very long time. We're very ancient. Somali explorers were, like, going out and, like, bringing things in. And so it's not just like, obviously the colonialism, like, happened, but even with that, it's like taking sort of, like, what was brought in by the colonial, like, sort of, like, forces and really making it our own thing, right? And so this is kind of like a two-way street where we're also influencing things or choosing to kind of, like, bring things back in.
Tell us a little bit more about the organization of the recipe section.
The recipe sections are, like, morning dishes, and then it would be afternoon. So there's, like, the afternoon asirio, which is a lot of, like, the light kind of, like, sweets, in the afternoon, or just, like, appetizers, etc., like sambusas and things like that. And then there's, like, a section for lighter foods, so that'll be, like, flatbreads and soups and things like that. And then you have your mains, whether it's for lunch or for dinner. You're having your rice and maybe some of your pastas, but also a lot of your meat dishes as well. And then ma'man, which is, like, desserts at the end of the meal, and then abitan, which is just the various drinks. There's so many recipes that I could get into this book. And so people will say, oh, well, did you do X, Y, and Z? And I'm like, I'm sorry.
Right.
Like, I really had limited space, like, it's already almost 80 recipes, but I also have, like, the historical, the pictures, like, everything, which everything that's in this book was really important for me to include in this book. So the images to me are just as important as, like, the writing or the recipes or the historical section or the stories.
And it's not a huge book. That's the other thing. Like, it's under 300 pages.
Yeah.
I'm sure they wanted to keep it, like, kind of usable so you could use it in the kitchen. And something Kate and I were remarking is how we were not intimidated. We were like, this looks like I can get all these ingredients. They're fitting on a page. And I guess we were wondering if you had to do any simplifying.
No. I mean, I think even when I'm talking about, like, in the beginning where you can source a lot of the, like, the ingredients and stuff, I think I say something about, like, how you can find most ingredients in just, like, regular grocery stores. Like, there aren't a lot of super specialty ingredients. It's really just about how the food comes together, the techniques and things like that. But in terms of just standard stuff, like, you'll be able to find most of the spices in, like, the grocery store, the rice, the pastas, etc. It's really just about how we put it together, not so much about, like, overly specialty tools or ingredients or things like that. So I think I would say that it's really approachable, and also the way that we wrote, or Jenny also edited like the recipes as well, and the rest of like the Hardy Grant team, was that we wanted to keep that sort of like flexibility that a lot of oral cooking cultures have, where you do a handful of this, a handful of that. And so for some of the stuff, I'm not saying like, okay, you have to put in this much lemon juice. You know, I'll say like juice of X amount of lemons or something, and you can kind of decide. I wanted to keep some of that, and so that was another great idea that Jenny had, where I also felt like was so in line with like my vision of the book, where I want people to have the guidance around how to do the recipes, but also Somali food is very forgiving. You know, even when I teach cooking classes as well, and so when I'm teaching my students, like I'll say we're not super precise with like the measurements or things like that, which also was another challenge, like, you know, doing the recipes, where I'm like, well, I still have to give a general like guideline, you know, and
but it's so hard to write recipes that way. You know, it's so much easier in a way to write recipes when things have to be precise than it is to be freewheeling in a way that gives people what they need to know, but guides them just enough. So were a lot of these recipes written down like when you learned how to cook from your mom? I mean, because it's an oral tradition. This isn't like you were going to some database of all these recipes and fine tuning your own recipes. Like you were writing all these from scratch.
Yeah, I was writing these from scratch. These were not written while my mom was teaching me growing up or anything. And so for a lot of them, especially when we got into crunch time, I would, you know, go over to my mom's house and I'd be like, okay, I have like 5 recipes to get through today. Let's cook through this together. Let's like measure everything. And obviously, like, my mom has her way of doing it, which is like wonderful. And that's what taught me. But then also, I have like sort of that extra stuff that I learned along the way, where I would sort of have to streamline things or whatever. There's like a really funny thing that kept happening where she would go to muscle memory. She would go to just put something in, and I would be across the kitchen going, no, you know, like, don't do that. I have to measure. And she's like, but it's just water. And I'm like, no, I need to know how much, you know?
Yeah. How did you decide what to keep recipe-wise?
I tried to really do as much like regional diversity as I could, because also another thing that I tried to deal with this in this book is like the idea of there being a singular kind of like Somali cuisine, which I think is sort of what's happened in the diaspora, where there's been a flattening of like the understanding of like what Somali cuisine is. And so I tried to really represent as many different regions as I could. And then, you know, kind of trying to balance of it, like, okay, we have 2 sambusas in this, so I don't need to add a 3rd sambusa filling type, right? Like, I really wanted to do like salmon sambusas, which is what I grew up eating in the Pacific Northwest, but that's not a traditional like Somali, that's like a Somali diaspora recipe. So like just really going to the base of like, okay, what's a sambus that everybody eats no matter what? Beef, tuna, you know, like things like that. Or like everyone eats anjero, you know, they call it different things. Everyone eats, you know, otka or mukhmad. And so thinking about like what are the commonalities across the diaspora, and then also the 5 regions of where Somali people live, and what are those sort of like traditions. So hambabur, for example, which is like kind of like anjero, but it's spiced. It has like turmeric and garlic and onions mixed in, and it's kind of like a sweet and savory. So that's often eaten in like northern Somalia and also in Djibouti. Just like thinking about the different like regions and the commonalities, you know, that people had with the food, and including what was the most common.
You have this great essay called On Fusion, Forced Migration, and Somali Food. And you kind of talk about that sort of tension between Somali people in Somalia today versus people like in the diaspora around the world. And people get, I think when you're in a diaspora, you get really passionate about certain things that you learned that you don't want to change because you don't want to lose the culture. But at the same time, you make this case that like culture is always evolving. There's always like a give and take.
Right.
So you have the history part, you have these recipes that go throughout the day, and then you have these essays, either essays from you or interviews you did with people. Why did you want to include those parts too?
That essay, I think, is the only one that's really beyond like the introduction, that where I'm actually like included. You know, I tried to really like not be in my book very much, even in the photo shoots. Like I think in the book, I'm only in one picture. And even like I remember doing the photo shoot in Mogadishu and Jenny being like, are you in any more photos? You know, and be like, no, I was so involved with every aspect of this book that I was like assisting the photographer Khadija and like making sure doing the props and, you know, so I'm really only in this book kind of like in the introduction, one photo and then that essay, I believe. And so I hesitated on adding that essay because I really didn't want the focus to be on me, you know, and I really just wanted to sort of platform other people's stories.
Yeah.
But I felt like it was necessary to have it in there to really understand like the migration portion of the food, right? Beyond like what the historical section was, and then beyond also what the experiences of the other people were, to really have this overarching kind of essay on the development of the food and like the migration's like impact on it. And so I thought that would be a good balance with the personal stories that other people were telling about like their own journeys in particular, to point to this like sort of like larger picture of how the migration and the formation of the diaspora communities abroad impacted the cuisine.
Yeah, no, they really work well. It's your book, but you didn't want it to be just about you. And I feel like that's why it'll have a very long life.
Yeah, I actually didn't want it to be about me at all.
But it had to be a little bit, because we want to know. Like, if I were reading this and you weren't in it at all, I'd be like, but who is the person behind the stories?
Who's the mysterious narrator, like in the background?
I want to know the narrator. It doesn't have to be all first person.
It's something that I'm very comfortable with, this sort of like curation style of like, okay, I think this is cool and I want this person to have attention, or I want this person to like be celebrated. And so, yeah, I guess I did have to be in the book in some way, but I was really trying not to be at all.
It's really your vision, even if
it's my baby. Yeah. Like literally, I think even the design. So another thing I really like is the chapter pages. Each of them has a different design, and that's like a traditional Somali fabric in each one. And so I wanted like every detail of the book to really show this sort of like intentionality and like care and celebration of like Somali culture. So yeah, I was involved in every aspect, even the photo shoots, like in Mogadishu, like I was organizing like where we would go and who we would talk to, and then also like literally helping Khadija with the shots. So I would be like, can we move that grain of rice?
Right.
Can we move this thing over? Should we do a sprinkle of like sugar here? Like, also I'm very into visuals and aesthetics. So even with the cover, like for me, it was really important that it looked like an art book cover.
And for people listening who haven't seen the cover yet, can you describe what's on the cover?
Yeah, so the cover is this really beautiful blue background. And then it's a picture of me, neck down, and I'm wearing this alindi fabric, which is one of the most like traditional and ancient like Somali fabrics. And then I'm holding a mortar and pestle, which I got in Somalia on one of my trips. I have henna on my fingertips and I'm wearing gold jewelry. So a lot of the henna, the gold, that's symbols of like Somali womanhood. And then the mortar and pestle is, you know, a symbol of Somali like culinary heritage, because that was like handmade by like artisans in Somalia and like painted. And to me, the mortar and pestle is also such an important tool in the Somali kitchen. And yeah, I just wanted to have that cover really feel like it was like an art book cover, and that it would always remain kind of like a classic. It would never really feel dated. And I think like a lot of publishers really want you to have like a food cover so that people understand that it's about food. But for me, I'm like, yeah, it's about food, but it's so much more than just a cookbook, and it's like has so many components. And I think the cover really speaks to everything the book covers, right? And I also wanted Somali people to like see it in a store, in a bookstore, and immediately like recognize like that it was for them.
Yeah.
Nice.
And can you tell us about the spelling too of the title?
That's the traditional way of spelling Somali, Somalia. Yeah. That's how it's written in the Somali language. And for me, that also was intentional, because I like really wanted it to speak to the people that it was for, and writing it the other way that people are used to seeing it, you know, it would be fine, but I did everything with intention.
Yeah, it's a beautiful project. Well, I wanted to just ask, you know, what goal did you have when you started this book? And do you feel that goal changed by the time you finished?
My goal was to write a book that really showed people the total span of Somali culture and history, and to understand how that impacted the food, and to really tell these stories, and to have the recipes, the stories, the history be a blueprint for Somali people, either of my generation or of future generations. And I achieved that.
Yes. Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now there'll be future Somali cookbooks who can use your book as a comp, which is also really exciting.
There shouldn't be nearly 20 years between Somali cookbooks, and Barlin Ali, who wrote Somali Cuisine, she became like basically a mentor to me throughout this process. And when she found out that I had contacted her to interview her for the book, she was like, "Oh, thank God, now I don't have to write a second book," So she became very supportive like throughout the process. She helped fill in so many of the gaps throughout the book by being in the book, and also by mentioning like the first very Somali cookbook. There is a direct line between all three of our books. They're kind of like in conversation with one another. Each time period that our books are in, you can see that development of the cuisine. So I'm very grateful for her and for all of the other kind of elders that were interviewed in this book, hearing their stories and also feeling the weight of like what the book was becoming and like really everything that it was showing, and having I'm like tearing up now, and also having the opportunity to like highlight these people, right, and celebrate them as like the pioneers that they are, and having them really like tell me like, and kind of affirm me that they really saw my book and like my work as a continuation of like what they started was just really a beautiful, like very like full circle thing. So yeah.
It's because you did such an amazing job.
Thank you so much.
Ifrah, thank you so much for chatting with us today. It's a beautiful book. It's a very important project. I'm so glad it exists.
Thank you so much. And it was truly such a pleasure to speak with the both of you.
Before we sign off, I want to tell you about Food Friends, Home Cooking Made Easy, a podcast for anyone who enjoys shows about cooking and baking. The hosts, Sonia and Carrie, are former professional chefs and longtime friends, and their show delivers both inspiration and lots of practical kitchen tips. And what I really love is they often talk about their favorite cookbooks, new and old, and the recipes that they've tried from them. New episodes come out twice a week, and I like to listen when I'm on my way to the market or looking for fresh kitchen inspiration. It's kind of like hanging out and chatting with a couple of friends who love to cook. Find Food Friends wherever you get your audio, and you can get more information at their Substack, foodfriendspodcast.substack.com.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more about each episode, subscribe to our newsletter at everythingcookbooks.substack.com. Here are other ways to support the show. Go to everythingcookbooks.com and check out our totes, t-shirts, sweatshirts, and other merch, or buy us a round of coffee. You can even leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Thanks, as always, to our editor, Abby Cirquitella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.